He stood in front of a mirror in a Hollywood costume department with a fake mustache in his hand, and he almost put it down and walked out. Most people think Sam Elliott was born to play Virgil Earp in Tombstone. But the truth is he had serious doubts and he was not sure he wanted the role at all. And what he revealed decades later about why he almost said no, that is the part nobody ever reported. Let's go back to 1992. Tombstone was not the guaranteed hit everyone remembers it as today. When the project first landed in Hollywood, it was a mess behind the scenes. The script had been passed around. Directors had come and gone. And the studio was nervous. Really nervous. Sam Elliott had already built a reputation by this point. He was the guy with the voice. The guy with the look. A face carved out of the American West itself. But being known for your look can be a trap in Hollywood, and Sam knew it. When the offer came in for Virgil Earp, Sam Elliott did not immediately say yes. According to a 1993 interview with Entertainment Weekly, Elliott admitted he sat on the offer longer than his team expected. He was not chasing another Western. He had played cowboys. He had worn the hat. He was worried, his words, about becoming a caricature of himself. Think about that for a second. Here is a man at the top of his craft. Recognizable. Respected. And still terrified of being put in a box that he could never get out of. But then something happened. He read the script again. Not the first draft, but a revised version that a relatively unknown director named George Pancosmatos had been working on quietly. And one scene stopped Sam Elliott cold. It was not a big action scene. It was not a gunfight. It was a quiet moment between Virgil Earp and his wife. A scene about loyalty. About a man who carries the weight of his family on his back while everything around him is on fire. Sam Elliott later said, and this is the part most fans never heard, that scene reminded him of his own father. A man who worked hard, said little, and protected his family without ever asking for applause. That was the moment he said yes. And here is where it gets interesting. Because saying yes to Tombstone was only the beginning. What Sam Elliott walked into on that set, the tension, the chaos, the competing egos, was something nobody fully prepared him for. A source close to the production told Vanity Fair years later that the Tombstone set was one of the most emotionally charged environments any of them had ever worked in. Strong personalities. High stakes. And one actor in particular who was about to steal every single scene he walked into. But we will get to that. Before I go further, I need to ask you something. Sam Elliott has been making movies for over 50 years. In your opinion, is Tombstone the greatest role of his entire career, or is there another performance that beats it? Drop your answer in the comments right now. I genuinely read every single one. Here is something that sounds small. But it is not small at all. The mustache changed everything. We are not talking about just a style choice. We are not talking about a costume department decision that took 5 minutes. What happened with Sam Elliott's mustache on the set of Tombstone is actually a window into who Sam Elliott really is as an actor. And once you understand it, you will never watch that film the same way again. Sam Elliott had been wearing a mustache in real life since the early 1970s. It was not a Hollywood prop. It was not manufactured for publicity. It was just him. His face. His identity. So when he showed up to discuss the role of Virgil Earp, there was an assumption from some people on the production team that the mustache was a given. It was not. According to costume and makeup records discussed in a 2018 retrospective by True West magazine, there were actual conversations, real debates about whether Sam Elliott should trim it, reshape it, or in one early suggestion remove it entirely for the role. The argument was that Virgil Earp needed to look distinct from Wyatt Earp. Different enough that audiences would not blur the two brothers together on screen. Sam Elliott pushed back. Not aggressively. Not with a tantrum. But with the quiet, firm confidence that people who have worked with him describe over and over again. He made the case that the mustache was not just about appearance. It was about character. Virgil Earp was a different kind of man than his brother Wyatt. Older. More weathered. Someone who had already seen what the world could do to a person. And that mustache, full, heavy, worn, communicated all of that before he ever said a single word. The director listened. And that decision, that one conversation that could have gone the other way, became one of the most recognizable images in Western cinema history. But here is where it gets darker. Because while Sam Elliott was fighting for his character's identity in the makeup chair, something else was happening on set that threatened to overshadow everything. A co-star was arriving on set in a condition that alarmed the entire crew. Showing up with a performance so unexpected, so electric, so completely unhinged in the best possible way that even veteran actors like Sam Elliott were stopping between takes just to watch. Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday was becoming something none of them had planned for. And Sam Elliott, a man who had been in Hollywood for 2 decades at that point, later admitted in a 2020 interview with The Hollywood Reporter that watching Val Kilmer work during those weeks was, in his own words, one of the most unsettling and extraordinary things he had witnessed on any set. Unsettling. That word choice matters. We will come back to it. Wait. Before I tell you what happened next, because this next part is something 99% of people never heard, make sure you are subscribed. This channel covers the stories mainstream media is too scared to touch. Hit subscribe. I will wait. Because what was really happening off camera during the filming of Tombstone, the feuds, the fear, and the moment one cast member thought the whole movie was going to collapse, that story starts right now. Nobody talks about this part. Everyone remembers Tombstone as this grand, polished Western epic. The performances. The quotable lines. The imagery that burned itself into American pop culture forever. But the version of Tombstone that actually exists on screen almost did not happen. Not because of money. Not because of the script. But because of what was happening behind the camera, in the trailers, in the production meetings, in the quiet moments between takes where the real drama was unfolding. And Sam Elliott was right in the middle of it. Let's start with the director situation. Because this is something the studio never wanted widely discussed. George Pancosmatos is listed as the director of Tombstone. And technically, legally, officially that is correct. But according to multiple sources, including a bombshell 2013 interview that Kurt Russell gave to the Los Angeles Times, the reality on set was far more complicated. Kurt Russell, who played Wyatt Earp and was also a producer on the film, has strongly suggested that he himself was effectively directing large portions of the movie while Cosmatos handled the technical execution. Russell described it carefully. Diplomatically. But the implication was clear. The creative vision driving Tombstone was coming from inside the cast. Now imagine being Sam Elliott in that environment. You are a professional. You have your craft. You have your process. And the entire command structure of the production is blurred. Nobody is entirely sure who the final authority is on any given day. That is not a comfortable place for any actor to work. That is controlled chaos. But Sam Elliott did not crack. People who worked on that set consistently describe him the same way. Calm. Focused. Present. A source interviewed by True West magazine during their 30th anniversary Tombstone feature said Elliott was the anchor of that cast in ways that never made the press. While other personalities were louder and more combustible, Elliott showed up, knew his lines, knew his character, and delivered every single time. But here is what that same source revealed that never made headlines. There was a specific week during production, mid-shoot, when the pressure was at its absolute peak, where a serious conversation happened about restructuring significant portions of the film. Scenes were being reconsidered. The balance of the story was being questioned. And in that conversation, according to people present, Sam Elliott said something that reframed how the entire ensemble thought about what they were making together. He reminded them what the story was actually about. Not the gunfights. Not the spectacle. Not the one-liners that would eventually become legendary. He brought it back to brotherhood. To loyalty. To men standing beside each other when everything is falling apart around them. And honestly, this part of the story hit me hard. Because how many of us have been in a situation where everything is chaos and one steady person in the room changes the entire energy? How many of us have been that person or desperately needed that person and never got them? Sam Elliott's story is not just about Hollywood. It is not just about westerns. It is about what it means to show up with integrity when the world around you is losing its mind. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been the steady person in a room full of chaos? Or have you ever had someone like that save a situation for you? I want to hear your story. Now the chaos on set was real. The pressure was real. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared the cast for what happened during the filming of one particular scene. A scene that was not even in the original shooting schedule. A scene that came together almost by accident. And it produced what many film historians now consider the single most powerful unscripted moment in the entire movie. Sam Elliott was there when it happened. And for nearly 30 years he never told anyone exactly what went on in those few minutes. Until now. Most people stopped at the headline. Big mistake. Because when you dig into the actual production history of Tombstone, the call sheets, the reshoots, the accounts from crew members who were standing 10 feet away when it happened, you find something that changes the entire way you understand this film. There is a moment in Tombstone that was not scripted. Not improvised in the loose, casual way that actors sometimes play with dialogue. Not a subtle word change that nobody notices. A genuine, unplanned, fully formed moment that emerged from a real emotional place and almost got cut from the movie entirely. And it involved Sam Elliott. Here is the setup. Late in the production schedule there was a scene being filmed that dealt with the aftermath of violence. The Earp brothers processing what they had lost. What the fight had cost them. It was a quieter scene in a film full of loud, explosive moments. And because of that, because it did not have gunfire or dramatic confrontations, it was not getting the same energy and attention as the bigger set pieces. The crew was tired. The schedule was running long. And there was pressure from the studio side to move faster. Sam Elliott knew something was wrong with how the scene was being approached. According to accounts later shared by a crew member in a 2019 podcast interview with Western Film Digest, Elliott stopped mid-rehearsal. Quietly. Without making a scene about it. And he said something to the people around him that shifted the entire atmosphere in that room. He said they were rushing a moment that the audience was going to need. Not want. Need. Think about that word choice. Because it tells you everything about how Sam Elliott understands storytelling. He was not talking about his performance. He was not protecting his screen time. He was thinking about the person sitting in a movie theater who had spent 2 hours invested in these characters. And he understood that if this moment was thrown away, if it was filmed quickly and carelessly just to hit a schedule, the audience would feel cheated without ever being able to explain why. The scene was reset. They took the time. And what Sam Elliott delivered in that take, a look, a silence, a single line spoken so quietly that the sound team had to adjust their levels, became something that the editor later described to Fade magazine as the emotional spine of the film's final act. But here is where the story takes a dark turn. Because that scene, that careful, deliberate, emotionally precise moment, was flagged in an early test screening. A studio note came back suggesting it slowed the pace. That it should be trimmed. Possibly removed. Sam Elliott found out about that note. And what he did next is the kind of thing that does not happen often in Hollywood. Because Hollywood runs on hierarchy. On politics. On knowing when to push and when to stay quiet. Most actors, even experienced ones, would have swallowed that note and moved on. Sam Elliott did not move on. According to a source with direct knowledge of the post-production process, Elliott made his position known through the appropriate channels. Professionally. Without threats or ultimatums. But with absolute clarity about what that scene meant to the integrity of the story and what losing it would do to the audience's emotional journey. The scene stayed in the film. Every single frame of it. And here is the part that connects everything together. Because that moment, that quiet insistence on doing things right even when nobody was watching and the schedule was screaming, is not just a behind-the-scenes anecdote. It is a pattern. It is who Sam Elliott has been his entire career. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Nobody reported what happened next. Because what came after that post-production battle was a conversation between Sam Elliott and Val Kilmer that reframed everything both men understood about what they had made together. A conversation that Sam Elliott kept completely private for almost 3 decades. Until a single interview changed everything. Some secrets are kept out of shame. Some are kept out of loyalty. And some, the ones that hit the deepest, are kept because the person holding them is not sure the world is ready to hear them yet. Sam Elliott kept this one for 30 years. And when he finally opened up, not in a splashy magazine cover story, not on a late-night couch with a host feeding him softball questions, but in a quiet, almost accidental moment during a long-form interview, the people who heard it understood immediately why he had waited so long. Let's talk about Val Kilmer first. Because you cannot tell this story honestly without going there. Val Kilmer's performance as Doc Holliday in Tombstone is widely considered one of the greatest supporting performances in the history of American cinema. Film scholars cite it. Other actors study it. Roger Ebert wrote about it with a reverence he reserved for very few performances. The swagger. The wit. The raw physical deterioration Kilmer brought to a dying man who refused to be pitied. It was extraordinary. And it was also, according to multiple people on that set, extraordinarily difficult to be around. Not in a malicious way. Not in a way that was cruel or targeted. But in the way that genuinely transcendent performers sometimes operate, completely consumed by something that the people around them cannot fully access or understand. He was Doc Holliday. On set. Off set. In the makeup chair. Between takes. At meals. Some cast members found it inspiring. Some found it exhausting. Some found it genuinely unsettling, and that word keeps coming up from multiple independent sources, which tells you something important. Sam Elliott found it fascinating. But not without complexity. In a 2020 extended interview with The Hollywood Reporter that ran nearly 4,000 words and received surprisingly little mainstream attention, Sam Elliott spoke carefully about his experience working alongside Kilmer. He chose his words the way he always does, slowly, deliberately, like a man who understands the weight of language. And what emerged from that conversation was something more honest than Hollywood interviews usually allow. Elliott acknowledged that there were moments on that set where he felt invisible. Not dismissed. Not disrespected. Invisible. In the specific way that happens when someone near you is generating so much heat and light that everything else in the room disappears by comparison. Think about what it takes to admit that. This is Sam Elliott. A man with 40 years of experience at that point. A man whose voice alone could command a room. And he sat in that interview and told the truth that working next to Val Kilmer during Tombstone required him to dig into himself in ways he had not expected. To find something in Virgil Earp that could exist in the same frame as Doc Holliday without being swallowed whole. But here is what that same interview revealed that almost nobody picked up on. Because most journalists quoted the surface-level material and moved on. Big mistake. Deeper in that conversation, Sam Elliott talked about a specific night during production. Late. After a long shooting day. When most of the crew had gone home and a few cast members were still on the lot. He and Val Kilmer ended up in the same space. Not planned. Not arranged. Just 2 men in the same place at the same time with nowhere else to be. And they talked. Really talked. Not about the film. Not about their characters. About what it meant to give everything you had to something and still not know if it was going to matter. About the strange loneliness of performing at your absolute limit in front of a camera while the rest of the world went about its business completely unaware. Sam Elliott said that conversation, that single unplanned late-night exchange on a tired movie lot in 1992, changed how he thought about his own career. About what he was doing it for. About what success actually looked like from the inside versus how it appeared from the outside. And then he said something that stopped the interviewer cold. He said that Tombstone was the first time in his career that he genuinely did not care if the movie succeeded. Not because he was indifferent, but because he knew, standing there in that moment, that he had done something real. Something true. Something that could not be taken back regardless of what the box office said or what the critics wrote or what Hollywood decided to do with it next. That kind of peace is rare. Most people spend their entire lives chasing it and never find it. Sam Elliott found it on a dusty movie set in Tucson, Arizona in the middle of a chaotic production that almost fell apart 3 separate times. And here is the final piece of this story. The part that connects everything: the mustache, the unscripted scene, the late-night conversation with Kilmer, the quiet battle to protect a moment nobody else thought mattered, into something that explains not just Tombstone but Sam Elliott himself. It starts with what happened when the film was released. And what the numbers said. And why Sam Elliott's reaction to those numbers was the most surprising thing of all. Nobody predicted this. Not the studio. Not the critics. Not the industry insiders who had watched the entire production unfold from a distance and made their quiet judgments about what Tombstone was going to mean for everyone involved. Not even Sam Elliott himself, a man who had been in Hollywood long enough to know that predictions are worthless and surprises are the only guarantee. When Tombstone opened in December of 1993, the reviews were mixed. Not bad. Not devastating. But mixed in that particular Hollywood way that signals a film is not going to be taken seriously by the people who hand out awards and write the year-end retrospectives. The New York Times was lukewarm. Several major critics acknowledged the performances while dismissing the film as genre entertainment. Competent. Enjoyable. But not important. The box office told a different story. Tombstone opened to solid numbers. Not spectacular. Not the kind of opening weekend that makes studio executives throw parties. But solid. And then something unusual happened. Instead of dropping off the way most films do in their second and third weeks, instead of following the standard Hollywood decay curve where opening weekend is the peak and everything after is a slow fade, Tombstone held. And then it grew. Word of mouth was spreading in a way that the marketing department had not manufactured and could not fully explain. People were going back to see it a second time. They were bringing friends who had not heard of it. They were standing in parking lots after screenings and quoting lines back and forth to each other with the kind of infectious energy that no advertising budget can buy. According to box office records analyzed in a 2013 piece by Entertainment Weekly marking the film's 20th anniversary, Tombstone eventually grossed over $56 million domestically against a production budget of approximately $25 million. In pure financial terms, that is a success. But the number that actually matters, the number that explains everything, came later. The home video numbers were staggering. Tombstone became one of the best-selling home video releases of 1994. And then it kept selling. Through VHS. Through DVD. Through Blu-ray. Through every format transition that the entertainment industry went through over the following 3 decades. A film that the critical establishment had filed under enjoyable but disposable turned out to be one of those rare pieces of work that people needed to own. Needed to return to. Needed to show their kids and their friends and the people in their lives who had somehow never seen it. Sam Elliott watched all of this happen from a particular distance. And here is the part that nobody reported correctly. Because most of the anniversary coverage focused on Val Kilmer. On the "I'm your Huckleberry" line. On the mustache competition between the Earp brothers. On Kurt Russell's commanding presence as Wyatt. All of that coverage was deserved. All of those performances earned every word written about them. But Sam Elliott's reaction to Tombstone's growing legacy was quietly the most profound of anyone in that cast. In a 2023 interview with Cowboys and Indians magazine, a publication that has covered Elliott more honestly and more deeply than most mainstream outlets ever bothered to, Elliott reflected on what it felt like to watch a film he had made 30 years earlier still finding new audiences. Still making people feel something. Still being discovered by teenagers and young adults who were not alive when it was filmed. He said it made him think about his father again. The same father who had inspired him to say yes to the role in the first place. The man who worked hard and said little and protected his family without asking for recognition. Sam Elliott said that Tombstone's endurance felt like proof of something his father had tried to teach him when he was young, that the work you do with integrity outlasts everything else. The politics fade. The box office numbers become trivia. The industry gossip evaporates. But the work remains. And then he said something that has stayed with me since I first read it. He said the greatest surprise of his entire career was not any award or any recognition or any moment of professional validation. It was the letters. The messages. The people who reached out over 30 years to tell him that Virgil Earp meant something specific to them. Not Doc Holliday. Not Wyatt Earp. Virgil. The steady one. The brother who carried the weight without making a speech about it. Those people were not responding to a performance. They were responding to something true. And that truth, that quiet, unglamorous, deeply human truth that Sam Elliott fought to protect in a makeup chair and a post-production meeting and a late-night conversation on a tired movie lot, is why Tombstone is not just a great Western. It is a film about what it costs to stand for something when standing is the harder choice. Sam Elliott knew that in 1992 when he said yes. He knows it now. And 30 years of letters from strangers proved that the audience always knew it too, even when the critics did not. There is one final piece of this story. One detail that connects Sam Elliott's journey through Tombstone directly to something much bigger. A pattern in his career that explains not just this film but every choice he has made since. Every role he took. Every role he turned down. Every time he stood quietly firm when the easier path was to go along. Because what you have just heard is not really a story about a movie. It is not really a story about Hollywood. It is a story about a man who decided very early on that he was going to do things the right way regardless of what it cost him. And then he spent 50 years proving that decision was correct. Sam Elliott never chased the loudest role in the room. He never fought for the headline or the award or the moment that would get the most attention. He looked for the truth in a character and then he protected that truth with everything he had in the costume department, on the set, in the editing room, in interviews 30 years after the camera stopped rolling. That is not common in Hollywood. That is not common anywhere. And the fact that Tombstone found its audience, kept its audience, and continues to mean something real to people who discover it for the first time today, that is not an accident. That is the direct result of one man refusing to cut corners when nobody would have noticed or cared if he did. But here is what I did not tell you yet. There is a part of this story, one final secret that connects directly to the untold truth of Sam Elliott's most controversial career decision after Tombstone. The role that divided his fan base. The choice that Hollywood insiders said would end his career. And why that decision turned out to be the most Sam Elliott thing he ever did. I am covering that in my next video. It is already uploaded. Go watch it right now. The link is on your screen.